3,000 years. No civilization in recorded history held together longer than the kingdom that rose along the Nile. Before Rome was even a village, before Greece had an alphabet, a state already ancient was raising monuments so precisely engineered that we still cannot fully explain how they were built. This is the complete story of Egypt, from its deepest roots to its final breath. It begins thousands of years before the first pharaoh, when a green Sahara slowly turned to dust and scattered communities converged on a narrow ribbon of black soil fed by annual floods. It follows the unification of two rival lands, the rise of god-kings who commanded pyramids into existence, and the golden age of empire when Egyptian armies marched to the Euphrates. It moves through the lives of farmers, scribes, weavers, and embalmers. It confronts the crises that shattered kingdoms, the foreign rulers who seized the throne, and the astonishing reinventions that followed each collapse. And it ends with Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, whose death delivered Egypt to Rome, but could not erase what 3 millennia had built. This story still shapes our world. Modern medicine, architecture, astronomy, and law carry traces of what began along the Nile. The monuments still stand. The questions they raise still have no final answers. If you enjoy complete journeys through the rise and fall of civilizations, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Let us begin where the desert meets the river, long before the pyramids, long before the crown. 6,000 years before the Common Era, the Sahara is green. Shallow lakes stretch across what will one day become the driest desert on Earth. Giraffes move through tall savanna grass. Cattle herders camp beside seasonal pools, leaving behind grinding stones and the charred remains of wild sorghum. Rock art etched into sandstone shelves across the western desert records this vanished world. Long-horned cattle, hunters with bows, figures swimming through water that no longer exists. Rain falls here in predictable cycles, and human communities spread across this immense grassland from the Atlantic coast to the Nile Valley, following the herds, fishing in lakes that will not survive the next 2 millennia. Then the rains begin to fail. Slowly, across centuries, the monsoon belt shifts southward. Lakes shrink to mudflats, grasslands thin to scrub. By 4,500 before the Common Era, the desiccation accelerates. Families who once ranged freely across the plateau now drift toward the one source of water that never disappears, the Nile. Its annual flood, driven by Ethiopian monsoon rains far to the south, deposits a ribbon of rich black silt across the valley floor each summer. This narrow strip of fertile earth, rarely more than a few kilometers wide, hemmed between limestone cliffs and open desert, becomes the stage for everything that follows. Along the Upper Nile, near the modern town of Badari, a culture takes shape around 4400 before the Common Era. The Badarian people cultivate emmer wheat and barley, store grain in clay-lined pits, and fashion some of the finest thin-walled pottery the ancient world will ever produce. Burnished vessels with rippled surfaces fired to a deep black and red. Their dead are buried in oval pits, knees drawn to the chest, facing west, surrounded by ivory combs, shell beads, and copper pins. These offerings suggest something profound, a belief that existence continues beyond death, that the departed require provisions for a journey yet to come. By 4,000 before the Common Era, the Nakada culture emerges further south, near the Great Bend of the Nile. Across 3 distinct phases spanning nearly 1,000 years, Naqada settlements grow in size and complexity. Naqada I communities produce red pottery painted with white geometric designs and hunt hippopotami in the river marshes. Naqada II sees an explosion of long-distance trade, obsidian from Ethiopia, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar from Lebanon, and the appearance of elaborate painted vessels depicting boats with many oars, standards, and human figures of authority. Social hierarchy deepens. Certain graves contain gold, mace heads, and carved ivory handles depicting scenes of warfare and domination. Others hold almost nothing. At Hierakonpolis in Upper Egypt, a massive ceremonial center rises, mud brick structures, a painted tomb showing boats and combat, and evidence of large-scale brewing. At Abydos, Tomb Uj, dating to roughly 3250 before the Common Era, yields hundreds of small bone and ivory tags inscribed with symbols that represent the earliest known Egyptian writing, not yet the elegant hieroglyphs of later centuries, but a system of notation recording goods, places, and perhaps royal names. In the delta to the north, the cultures of Buto and Mahdi develop their own traditions, more closely linked to the Levantine world. 2 distinct regions, Upper and Lower Egypt, crystallize, each with its own symbols, its own centers of power. Then, around 3100 before the Common Era, a carved ceremonial palette found at Hierakonpolis records a decisive moment. On one side, a figure wearing the tall white crown of Upper Egypt strikes down a kneeling enemy. On the other, the same figure wears the red crown of Lower Egypt and surveys rows of decapitated bodies. This is the Narmer palette. Whether it records a single battle or a process spanning generations, its message is unambiguous. The 2 lands have become one. A state unlike anything the world has seen is about to be born. The state that emerges from unification is not born in a single stroke. It is assembled year by year, reign by reign, across 4 centuries of deliberate institution building. The first rulers of a unified Egypt face an immense practical challenge: how to govern a kingdom stretching more than 1,000 kilometers along a single river, binding together peoples whose dialects, customs, and loyalties remain stubbornly local. The answer they devise will shape human governance for millennia. The king known as Aha, likely the immediate successor of Narmer, establishes a new capital at the precise hinge point of the realm. Where the narrow valley of Upper Egypt opens into the broad fan of the delta, on the western bank, a city rises from the floodplain. The Egyptians call it Ineb Hedge, the White Walls, for the gleaming plastered mud brick fortification that encircles its royal enclosure. Later generations know it as Memphis. Its location is strategic genius. From here, the crown can monitor traffic moving north toward the sea and south toward the cataracts. Granaries fill with surplus grain taxed from surrounding fields. Workshops produce stone vessels of astonishing precision, alabaster bowls with walls so thin that light passes through them. Memphis becomes the administrative heart of a kingdom whose population may already number between 1 and 2 million souls. To manage this population, the early kings divide the country into provinces called nomes, each governed by a royal appointee. Upper Egypt eventually counts 22 nomes, Lower Egypt 20. Each nome has its own capital, its own patron deity, its own agricultural calendar tuned to local conditions. Yet all answer to the palace. A class of literate officials emerges, trained in the increasingly sophisticated hieroglyphic script that now records royal decrees, tax assessments, and ritual calendars on ivory labels, clay seal impressions, and stone stele. Writing transforms from a tool of symbolic power into the nervous system of the state. At Abydos in Upper Egypt, the earliest kings construct their funerary monuments, massive mud-brick tombs sunk into the desert gravel, their exteriors decorated with the recessed, niched facade that imitates palace architecture. Surrounding these royal burials, subsidiary graves hold the remains of servants and courtiers, suggesting that in the earliest reigns, retainers followed their king into death. At Saqqara, near Memphis, a parallel set of enormous mastabas rises on the plateau overlooking the capital, their scale rivaling the Abydos tombs. Scholars still debate which site held the actual royal burial and which served as a cenotaph, but both proclaim the same message. The king's power endures beyond death. The reign of Den, fifth king of the First Dynasty, around 2900 before the Common Era, represents a high point of early kingship. Ivory labels from his reign record military campaigns in the Sinai, a royal jubilee festival called the Esed, and the first known use of the dual title, he of the Sedge and the Bee, symbolizing sovereignty over both Upper and Lower Egypt. His tomb at Abydos introduces a granite floor, the earliest known use of this hard stone in construction, signaling both technical ambition and access to the distant quarries at Aswan. The Second Dynasty, spanning roughly 2800 to 2686 before the Common Era, is more obscure, its records fragmentary. Internal conflict appears to flare. Some kings seem to abandon the Horus title temporarily in favor of the Set animal, hinting at ideological or regional tensions between North and South. The dynasty's final ruler, Khâsekhemoui, resolves this crisis decisively. His statues depict fallen enemies carved at his feet, and inscriptions record the slaughter of tens of thousands of northern rebels. His tomb at Abydos, the largest of all early dynastic royal burials, features a central chamber lined with dressed limestone, a foretaste of the monumental stone architecture about to transform the landscape. By the time of his death, around 2686 before the Common Era, the institutions of Pharaonic Egypt are firmly in place. A divine king wearing the double crown, a literate bureaucracy, provincial governance, monumental royal tombs, and a theology that binds the ruler to the gods. The foundations are laid. What rises upon them will astonish the world. The old king Khâsekhemoui is barely cold in his limestone-lined tomb when a new era announces itself in stone. His successor, Djoser, ascends the throne of the Third Dynasty around 2670 before the Common Era, and beside him stands a man whose genius will reshape the physical world. Imhotep, physician, priest, architect, and chancellor, holds more titles than any official before him. His name is inscribed on the base of a royal statue at Saqqara, a rare honor that speaks to his extraordinary standing. What he conceives for his king's burial will break every precedent in human construction. At Saqqara, on the desert plateau overlooking Memphis, Imhotep begins with a traditional mastaba, a flat-topped rectangular tomb of mud brick. Then he does something no builder has done before. He stacks a second, smaller mastaba on top of the first, then a third, then a fourth. The structure rises in 6 diminishing steps to a height of roughly 60 meters, clad entirely in fine white limestone quarried from Tura on the Nile's eastern bank. The Step Pyramid is the first monumental stone building in recorded history. Around it, Imhotep designs an enormous enclosure spanning 15 hectares, surrounded by a paneled limestone wall over 10 meters high. Inside stand ceremonial courts, chapels, and facades, carved to imitate reed bundles and wooden doors, translated permanently into stone, as though freezing the architecture of the living world into eternity. The ambition does not stop with Djoser. Across the following century, each successor pushes the form further. At Meidum, around 2600 before the Common Era, Sneferu, first king of the 4th dynasty, begins a stepped pyramid that is later modified into a smooth-sided form. The outer casing partially collapses, leaving the strange, tower-like ruin visible today. Undeterred, Sneferu moves north to Dasha and begins again. The bent pyramid rises at a steep angle of 54 degrees before the builders, recognizing structural instability, reduce the slope midway to 43 degrees, producing its distinctive bent profile. Still unsatisfied, Sneferu commissions a third pyramid nearby, the Red Pyramid, named for the reddish hue of its exposed limestone core. Built at the gentler angle from the start, it stands as the first true smooth-sided pyramid in history. No other pharaoh invests more stone in pyramid construction than Sneferu. His 3 monuments represent decades of architectural experimentation, each failure informing the next attempt. The lessons converge at Giza. Around 2560 before the Common Era, Sneferu's son Khufu commands the construction of the Great Pyramid on the limestone plateau west of Memphis. It rises to 146 meters, the tallest structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. An estimated 2.3 million blocks of limestone, each averaging 2.5 tons, are quarried from the plateau itself and from Tura across the river. Granite beams weighing up to 80 tons, cut at Aswan over 800 kilometers to the south, are floated downriver on barges during the annual flood and hauled into the pyramid's interior to roof the king's chamber. The precision is staggering. The base measures 230 meters per side, with corners accurate to within centimeters. No slaves build this monument. Excavations led by Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass at the workers' village south of the pyramid reveal a planned settlement, housing thousands of laborers organized into rotating crews with names like Friends of Khufu. Bakeries produce hundreds of loaves daily. Breweries supply beer. Cattle bones indicate a protein-rich diet. These are fed, housed, and organized workers, participants in a national project that binds the provinces to the crown through labor, logistics, and shared purpose. The pyramid is not merely a tomb. It is the engine of the state itself, a machine that transforms grain, stone, and human effort into divine permanence. Inside, 3 chambers mark the evolution of the design. A subterranean chamber cut into bedrock, the misnamed Queen's Chamber, and the soaring King's Chamber with its granite sarcophagus. Above, 5 relieving chambers distribute the colossal weight of the stone above. Outside, white Tura limestone casing stones once sheathed the entire surface, catching the sun and blazing like a second star above the desert. Khufu's son Khafra raises the second Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau, set slightly back and on higher ground so that it appears, from certain angles, taller than his father's monument. Its summit still retains a cap of original Tura limestone casing, a pale crown against the desert sky. But Khafra's most enduring creation crouches at the base of the causeway leading to his valley temple. Carved from a single outcrop of limestone bedrock, the Great Sphinx gazes east toward the rising sun, a lion's body bearing a royal Nemes headdress, its face almost certainly modeled on the king himself. At 73 meters long and 20 meters high, it is the largest monolithic statue in the ancient world, a sentinel fusing animal power with divine kingship. Beside it, Khafra's Valley Temple stands sheathed in red granite from Aswan, its interior columns polished to a mirror finish, its floors designed to channel light across alabaster surfaces. Menkaure, Khafra's successor, completes the Giza triad with a smaller pyramid, its lower courses clad in Aswan granite rather than limestone. The scale has already begun to contract. The age of the largest pyramids is passing, though the theology driving them grows only more elaborate. With the Fifth Dynasty, a transformation reshapes the monarchy's spiritual architecture. Beginning with Userkaf around 2494 before the Common Era, pharaohs construct open-air sun temples at Abu Ghorob, north of Saqqara. These are not tombs, but places of perpetual worship dedicated to Ra, the sun god whose name now fuses permanently with royal titulary. Each king styles himself Son of Ra. The sun temples feature massive obelisks, squat, broad-based pillars topped with gilded pyramidions called benben stones, standing in open courtyards where sunlight itself serves as the divine presence. Alabaster altars receive offerings at dawn. No roof intervenes between the priest and the sky. The Fifth Dynasty pyramids at Abu Sir are modest compared to Giza, yet their accompanying mortuary temples grow richer in carved relief. Sahura's temple walls depict trading expeditions to Punt and Lebanon, naval vessels with sails unfurled, and the king smiting enemies in ritual scenes. Neferukare's unfinished complex yields the Abu Sir papyri, administrative documents revealing the intricate daily operations of a royal mortuary cult. Schedules of offerings, inventories of linen and bread, duty rosters for priests rotating through monthly service. Then, around 2345 before the Common Era, something extraordinary appears inside the Pyramid of Unas, the last king of the Fifth Dynasty. The walls of his burial chamber are covered, floor to ceiling, with vertical columns of hieroglyphs carved into the limestone and filled with blue-green pigment. These are the pyramid texts, the oldest corpus of religious literature known to humanity. 714 spells and utterances guide the dead king through the dangers of the underworld, transform him into a star among the imperishable circumpolar stars, and ensure his eternal union with Ra and Osiris. The language is archaic, dense, incantatory. Some passages may preserve oral traditions centuries older than the inscriptions themselves. The Sixth Dynasty continues this tradition. Teti, Pepi I, and Merenre all inscribe pyramid texts in their burial chambers at Saqqara. But the political landscape shifts beneath the theological surface. Provincial governors, nomarchs, accumulate hereditary power. Their tombs grow larger and more elaborate, decorated with vivid scenes of daily life: cattle herding, fishing with nets, harvesting flax, brewing beer. The autobiography of Weni, carved in his tomb at Abydos, records a career spanning 3 reigns: judge, military commander, canal builder, revealing a state that increasingly depends on capable officials rather than royal charisma alone. Harkuf, governor of Elephantine, leads 4 expeditions deep into Nubia, returning with incense, ebony, ivory, and on one occasion a dancing pygmy, that delights the young king Pepi II. Pepi II ascends the throne as a child around 2278 before the Common Era. His reign stretches for what ancient sources claim is 94 years, the longest in recorded history. But longevity becomes liability. As decades pass, the crown's grip loosens. Nomarchs cease rotating through royal appointments and instead pass their offices to their sons. Provincial wealth rivals that of the palace. The pyramid Pepi II builds at South Saqqara is small, its construction mediocre. When he finally dies, the succession fractures. The 7th and 8th dynasties are phantoms, brief reigns, contested claims, a throne that no longer commands the two lands. The centralized state that built the pyramids has spent its force. The provinces hold the real power now, and the long silence of the first intermediate period begins to settle over the Nile Valley like dust. The dust settles, but it does not settle evenly. In the south, the Nile still floods, still deposits its black silt across the narrow valley floor, still feeds the barley and emmer wheat that sustain the villages clinging to its banks. But the orders that once flowed from Memphis, the tax assessments, the labor corvées, the royal decrees carved in stone, have stopped. The white walls still stand, but the authority they once projected has evaporated like water on summer limestone. Egypt after the fall of the 6th dynasty is a country of fragments. In Middle Egypt, a family of local rulers at Heracleopolis Magna, near the entrance to the Fayum Basin, claims the throne. The 9th dynasty, and after it the 10th, governs from this provincial city, asserting nominal kingship over the northern nomes. Their power is real but limited. They control the fertile Fayum and the strategic corridor between Upper and Lower Egypt, and they maintain diplomatic ties with the delta's local chiefs. But their reach does not extend far south. Below Asyut, the land belongs to other men. The nomarchs of this era are warlords and administrators in equal measure. At Moala, south of Thebes, the governor Ankhtafi leaves inscriptions on the pillars of his rock-cut tomb that speak with startling frankness. He describes a land gripped by famine so severe that parents consume their own children. He boasts of feeding his nome when neighboring provinces starved, of leading military expeditions against Thebes and its allies. His words are not those of a subordinate reporting to a king. They are the declarations of a man who considers himself the savior of his own domain. Across Middle Egypt, similar figures emerge. Local strongmen who raise militias, collect taxes, adjudicate disputes, and commission tombs decorated in bold, angular provincial styles that owe little to the refined Memphis workshops of the Old Kingdom. The rock-cut tombs at Beni Hassan, carved into limestone cliffs overlooking the Nile in the Oryx Nome, display this regional artistic independence vividly. Wrestling sequences painted in ochre and black show hundreds of distinct holds and throws. Scenes of siege warfare, cattle herding, and textile production fill the walls, a visual record of communities turned inward, self-sufficient, proud of their autonomy. Yet this is also an age of profound literary and philosophical questioning. The admonitions of Ipuwer, though its precise date remains debated, describes a world turned upside down, the rich made poor, the poor seizing wealth, the river running with blood, the desert encroaching on cultivated land. The dialogue of a man with his soul contemplates whether death might be preferable to life in a broken world. These texts, preserved on later papyrus copies, reveal a society grappling with the collapse of cosmic order, of Mayat itself. Far to the south, at Thebes, a modest town sacred to the war god Montu, a family of local rulers begins consolidating power. The 11th dynasty emerges here, its early kings bearing the name Intef. Intef I and his successors expand Theban control northward, nome by nome, clashing repeatedly with Heracleopolitan forces and their ally, the nomarch of Asyut. The conflict is grinding, generational, fought along the Middle Nile in campaigns that leave little monumental record, but reshape the political map. The decisive figure is Mentuhotep II, who ascends the Theban throne around 2055 years before the Common Era. Over a reign of roughly 51 years, he wages a sustained military campaign that crushes Heracleopolitan resistance, subdues the independent nomarchs, and reunites the two lands under a single crown for the first time in over a century. His victory is commemorated in a mortuary temple of revolutionary design, a terraced structure rising against the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari on the west bank of Thebes, its colonnaded porticos stepping upward toward a central sanctuary. Painted reliefs depict his military triumphs, a mass grave of 60 soldiers found near the temple, their bodies bearing the wounds of battle, offers silent testimony to the human cost of reunification. Mentuhotep II adopts the Horus name, meaning he who unites the two lands. Thebes, once a provincial backwater, becomes the seat of a renewed kingdom. The administrative apparatus begins to reconstitute itself. Nomarchs retain local influence, but now answer once again to a central authority. The long fracture is mending. Egypt's classical age is about to begin. The fracture has mended, but the dynasty that mended it does not hold. Mentuhotep II's successors govern for barely 2 generations before the 11th dynasty exhausts itself. Around 1985, before the Common Era, a vizier named Amenemhat seizes the throne. Whether by palace coup or political maneuvering, the sources do not say clearly. What is certain is that he founds the 12th dynasty, and with it, inaugurates the most stable and culturally productive era Pharaonic Egypt will ever know. Amenemhat I's first decisive act is geographic. He abandons Thebes as the seat of government and establishes a new capital called Ichtawi, Caesar of the two lands, near the entrance to the Fayum Basin, roughly where Upper and Lower Egypt meet. The city's exact location remains unexcavated, buried beneath Nile silt somewhere south of Memphis, but its strategic logic is unmistakable. From Ichtawi, the king can monitor both the delta and the southern valley, balancing the old Memphite administrative tradition with the Theban dynasty's religious authority. The Fayum itself, a vast depression fed by a branch of the Nile, becomes a focus of royal investment. Irrigation canals are dug, marshland is drained, and new agricultural estates multiply across the basin's fertile edges. To secure the succession, Amenemhat I introduces a practice that will define the dynasty: co-regency. He elevates his son Senusret I to the throne while still living, ensuring continuity and discouraging rivals. The system works, but not perfectly. The Instructions of Amenemhat, a literary text composed after the king's death, describes an assassination attempt in the royal bedchamber, a night of treachery that may have claimed his life. Whether historical fact or political fiction designed to legitimize Senusret's sole rule, the text becomes one of the most copied works in Egyptian literary history, studied by scribes for centuries. Senusret I expands in every direction. Southward, Egyptian fortifications push deep into Lower Nubia, securing access to gold mines and diorite quarries. Northward and eastward, trade caravans move toward Byblos on the Lebanese coast, exchanging linen, papyrus, and gold for cedar wood, essential for shipbuilding and temple construction. At Karnak, Senusret erects a graceful white limestone chapel, the White Chapel, whose carved reliefs listing the nomes of Egypt provide one of the most complete administrative maps of the Middle Kingdom. It is Senusret III, reigning around 1870 to 1831 before the Common Era, who transforms Nubia from a trade frontier into a militarized border zone. Massive mud brick fortresses rise at Buhan, Semna, Kuma, Uronati, and Mergisa along the Second Cataract, their walls 10 meters thick, fitted with bastions, dry moats, and interior granaries capable of sustaining garrisons through prolonged siege. Senusret III fixes the southern boundary of Egypt at Semna and erects stelae forbidding Nubians from passing northward except for trade. His statuary abandons the serene idealism of earlier kings. The carved faces are heavy-lidded, furrowed, stern, portraits of a ruler who wishes to project vigilance rather than divinity. Under Amenemhat III, the Fayum reaches its agricultural peak. The region's lake, called Moeris by later Greek visitors, is regulated to serve as a reservoir. Quartzite colossi of the king stand at Biamu overlooking the water. The labyrinth at Hawara, his mortuary temple, astonishes later travelers with its complexity. This is also the age of Egypt's greatest literature. The story of Sinuhe, composed during the early 12th dynasty, follows a court official who flees Egypt after Amenemhat I's death, lives among Asiatic nomads, and ultimately returns home to be buried in Egyptian soil. The tale of the eloquent peasant explores justice and rhetoric. Coffin texts painted inside wooden coffins of nobles and officials democratize the afterlife. Spells once reserved for kings now guide ordinary Egyptians through the underworld. Osiris, lord of the dead, rises to supreme importance in funerary belief. The execration texts, names of foreign enemies inscribed on pottery figurines and ritually smashed, reveal both the reach and the anxieties of a state that governs with bureaucratic precision, yet fears the chaos beyond its borders. The classical age hums with confidence, discipline, and a literature that will be read for 1,000 years. But confidence, however deep, cannot hold forever against the slow erosion of a dynasty's grip. The 13th dynasty, which follows the 12th, produces dozens of kings in rapid succession, some reigning only months, their names barely scratched into the record before the next claimant seizes the double crown. The administrative machinery still turns, the bureaucrats still file their reports, but the center weakens. And in the eastern delta, where the Nile branches into marshland and the trade roads from Canaan converge, a different kind of power takes root. Asiatic settlers have lived in the delta for generations. Merchants, herders, craftsmen, they arrive along routes that Egyptian traders themselves have used for centuries. At a site called Avaris, near the Pelusiac branch of the Nile, a community of Levantine origin grows steadily through the late 13th dynasty. Their houses follow Canaanite architectural plans. Their pottery carries Syrian and Palestinian forms. Their burials include donkey sacrifices, a practice unknown in Egyptian tradition. Manfred Biertak's excavations at Tel el-Daba reveal a settlement that expands from a modest trading quarter into a fortified city, its population swelling as central authority recedes. The Egyptians call them Hekakasut, rulers of foreign lands. Later Greek writers render this as Hyksos. By roughly 1650 before the Common Era, these foreign chiefs have consolidated enough power to declare themselves pharaohs. The 15th dynasty rules from Avaris, and its kings, Salatus, Khayan, Apepi, adopt Egyptian royal titulary, worship Seth as their patron deity in his Egyptian form, commission scarabs inscribed with hieroglyphs, and patronize Egyptian scribal culture. The Rhind mathematical papyrus, one of the most important surviving mathematical texts, is copied during Apepi's reign. Yet Avaris itself retains a distinctly Levantine character. Frescoes discovered in the palace complex display Minoan-style bull-leaping scenes, evidence of connections stretching across the eastern Mediterranean to Crete. The Hyksos bring technologies that will reshape Egyptian warfare permanently. The horse-drawn chariot, light and fast, pulled by a team of 2 horses over flat terrain, gives its riders devastating tactical mobility. The composite bow, laminated from horn, wood, and sinew, delivers arrows with greater range and penetrating power than the simple self-bow. Bronze weapons, khopesh swords, socketed axes, improved daggers, outclass the copper armaments of the old Egyptian military. These are not inventions of the Hyksos alone, but innovations circulating across the Near East, and Avaris serves as the conduit through which they enter the Nile Valley. In the south, Thebes endures. The 17th dynasty governs Upper Egypt from the old sacred city, maintaining Egyptian traditions, burying its kings in modest tombs on the West Bank. For decades an uneasy coexistence holds, the Hyksos in the north, the Thebans in the south, and a Nubian kingdom of Kush pressing from beyond the First Cataract. But around 1558 before the Common Era, war erupts. Seqenenre Tao marches north against the Hyksos. His mummy, recovered in the 19th century, tells the story his inscriptions do not. The skull bears at least 5 terrible wounds inflicted by axe, dagger, and mace, injuries consistent with Hyksos weaponry. He dies in battle or its immediate aftermath. His son Thutmose takes up the cause. The Carnarvon tablet preserves fragments of his war account. Thutmose rails against the humiliation of sharing Egypt with a foreign ruler and an independent Kush. He strikes northward by river, raiding Hyksos positions, intercepting a messenger carrying a letter from Apepi to the king of Kush, proposing a coordinated attack on Thebes from both ends. The alliance never materializes. Thutmose reaches the outskirts of Avaris, but cannot take the city. He dies shortly after, and the task falls to his brother, or possibly his son, Ahmose I. Ahmose besieges Avaris around 1550 before the Common Era. The city falls. He pursues the retreating Hyksos into southern Canaan, besieging the fortress of Sharuhen for 3 years before it too capitulates. Egypt is reunified under a single native ruler. The 18th dynasty begins, and with it, a new age, one forged in the memory of foreign occupation and armed with the very weapons the foreigners brought. The memory of Avaris burns like a brand. Ahmose I does not merely expel the Hyksos, he dismantles the conditions that allowed their rise. In the years following the siege, he campaigns southward into Nubia, reasserting Egyptian control over the gold-bearing regions between the First and Second Cataracts. He rebuilds the Temple of Amun at Karnak, quarrying fine limestone from Tura and commissioning cedarwood barks from Byblos. The administration is restructured around loyal military men who proved themselves during the Liberation War, replacing the fractured provincial system that had allowed the Delta to slip away. A new Egypt is taking shape, centralized, militarized, and conscious of its vulnerability in ways the Middle Kingdom never was. His successors consolidate what he began. Amenhotep I extends Nubian campaigns and initiates the practice of separating the royal mortuary temple from the hidden tomb, a tradition that will define the Theban West Bank for centuries. Thutmose I pushes Egypt's borders further than any pharaoh before him, marching his army beyond the Fourth Cataract, deep into Kush, and then pivoting north to campaign along the Euphrates River, where he erects a victory stela on its western bank. Egypt is no longer a river kingdom defending its borders. It is becoming an empire. But the most extraordinary reign of this dynasty belongs to a woman. When Thutmose II dies around 1479 before the Common Era, his son by a secondary wife is still a child. Hatshepsut, the great royal wife and daughter of Thutmose I, assumes the regency. Within 7 years, she takes the full titulary of pharaoh, depicted in statuary wearing the false beard and the double crown, her body rendered in the masculine conventions of royal art. She does not seize power through violence. She constructs legitimacy through theology, claiming divine birth from Amun himself in reliefs carved at her mortuary temple. That temple rises against the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari in 3 broad colonnaded terraces connected by central ramps, its pale limestone glowing against the tawny rock face. Painted reliefs along its walls depict the expedition to Punt, a distant land reached by sailing the Red Sea coast, probably located along the shores of modern Eritrea or Somalia. The reliefs show Egyptian ships loaded with myrrh trees in baskets, gold rings weighed on scales, ebony logs, leopard skins, and live baboons tethered to the decks. The ruler of Punt and his wife greet the Egyptian envoys. These images constitute one of the most detailed records of a trading mission in the ancient world. Hatshepsut rules for roughly 21 years. Temples rise at Karnak, including a pair of towering obelisks sheathed in electrum. Trade flourishes. The turquoise mines of Sinai operate at full capacity. Then, around 1458 before the Common Era, she disappears from the record, and Thutmose III, her stepson, now a grown man trained in the military, assumes sole power. What follows is a reign of relentless expansion. In his first solo year, a coalition of Canaanite and Syrian city-states led by the Prince of Kadesh gathers at the fortress city of Megiddo. Thutmose marches his army through the narrow Aruna Pass, a route his own officers counsel against, and emerges on the plain before Megiddo, catching the coalition off guard. The battle, recorded in extraordinary detail on the walls of Karnak by his scribe Janeni, ends in Egyptian victory, though the troops pause to loot the enemy camp, allowing the defenders to retreat behind Megiddo's walls. A 7-month siege follows before the city surrenders. Over the next 2 decades, Thutmose III conducts at least 17 campaigns into Syria-Palestine. He crosses the Euphrates, defeats the kingdom of Mitanni, and receives tribute from Babylon, Assyria, and the Hittites. Nubia is administered through a viceroy titled the King's Son of Kush. Gold flows north from mines near the Second Cataract. Tribute lists at Karnak enumerate copper, lapis lazuli, horses, chariots, slaves, and grain from dozens of vassal states. Egypt's empire stretches from the Fourth Cataract to the banks of the Euphrates. the largest territorial extent it will ever achieve. The boy who waited in Hatshepsut's shadow has become the Napoleon of the ancient world, and the Nile Valley stands at the center of an international order shaped by Egyptian power. The empire Thutmose III built does not crumble. It ripens. 2 generations after his death, the throne passes to his great-grandson Amenhotep III, who inherits not a kingdom at war, but a kingdom so wealthy that its primary challenge is the management of abundance. Around 1390 before the Common Era, Egypt's treasury overflows with Nubian gold, Levantine timber, Aegean oils, and Afghan lapis lazuli. The pharaoh does not need to campaign. He hunts lions instead, more than 100 in the first decade of his reign, commemorated on scarabs distributed across the empire like royal press releases. At Thebes, Amenhotep III builds on a scale that rivals the Pyramid Age. His mortuary temple on the West Bank, the largest ever constructed, stretches across a vast precinct. Only the 2 seated colossi at its entrance survive into later millennia. The colossi of Memnon, each standing 18 meters tall, carved from single blocks of quartzite hauled from quarries near modern Cairo. Across the river, the Temple of Luxor rises in elegant sandstone colonnades. At Malkata, south of the Theban necropolis, the pharaoh constructs a sprawling palace complex with painted floors, glazed tile walls, and an artificial harbor large enough for ceremonial barges. This is a court that trades letters with the kings of Babylon, Mitanni, Assyria, and the Hittites. Correspondence preserved on cuneiform tablets found centuries later at Amarna. Gold is so plentiful that foreign rulers write to request it by name, noting that in Egypt it is as common as dust. Then the sun arrives, and everything changes. Around 1353 before the Common Era, Amenhotep IV ascends the throne. Within 5 years, he elevates the Aten, the visible disk of the sun, above every other deity, including Amun, the supreme god of Thebes, whose priesthood controls vast estates and enormous wealth. He changes his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, and orders the construction of an entirely new capital on virgin ground in Middle Egypt. The site known as Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten, rises at modern Amarna on a crescent of desert between limestone cliffs and the river. Boundary stelae carved into the surrounding hills define the city's sacred limits and declare that the Aten itself chose this place. The city is built with astonishing speed. Mud brick houses, administrative buildings, workshops, and open-air temples fill the plain within a few years. Unlike the dark, enclosed sanctuaries of traditional Egyptian worship, the Aten's temples have no roofs. Sunlight pours directly onto offering tables laden with bread, beer, meat, and flowers. There is no cult statue to wash, dress, and feed in morning ritual. The god is the sun itself, visible to all, yet accessible only through the pharaoh and his queen Nefertiti, who appears in reliefs with a frequency and prominence unmatched by any previous royal consort. The art of the period shatters convention. Royal portraits show elongated skulls, full lips, narrow eyes, swollen bellies, and wide hips. The royal family is depicted in intimate domestic scenes, Akhenaten and Nefertiti kissing their daughters beneath the Aten's rays, each ray ending in a small hand offering the Ankh, the sign of life. Nothing like this has appeared before in 3,000 years of Egyptian art. But the revolution carries a cost. Temples of Amun are closed. The god's name is chiseled from monuments across the country. The priesthood, once the wealthiest institution outside the throne, loses its income and influence. Diplomatic correspondence suggests that Egypt's vassals in Syria-Palestine plead for military support that never comes as the pharaoh's attention turns inward. Around 1336 before the Common Era, Akhenaten dies. The circumstances remain unclear. Nefertiti may have ruled briefly as co-regent or successor under a different name. A shadowy figure called Smenkhkare appears in the record for perhaps a year. Then a boy of 9 or 10, Tutankhaten, takes the throne. He changes his name to Tutankhamun, restores the old gods, abandons Akhetaten, and returns the court to Thebes. The city on the plain empties. Sand drifts through roofless temples. The Aten's brief supremacy fades into silence, and the priests of Amun reclaim their altars. Tutankhamun does not live long enough to see the restoration complete. He dies around 1323 before the Common Era, still a teenager, his body placed in a small tomb in the Valley of the Kings that will remain sealed for more than 3,000 years. The throne passes briefly to the elderly vizier Ai, and then to the man who will reshape Egypt's course, the general Horemheb. A commoner by birth, Horemheb has served as commander of the army and regent during Tutankhamun's reign. He takes the double crown with the legitimacy of a soldier who has held the state together through a decade of uncertainty. His rule is methodical, almost surgical. He dismantles the last traces of the Amarna experiment, usurps monuments of his predecessors, erases Akhenaten's name from king lists, and restores the military and priestly hierarchies to full function. When he dies without an heir around 1295 before the Common Era, he bequeaths the throne to another military man, his vizier, an old soldier from the eastern delta named Ramesses. Ramesses I reigns barely 2 years, but the dynasty he founds will define an era. His son Seti I campaigns aggressively into Syria-Palestine, recapturing territory lost during the Amarna years, and begins the Great Hypostyle Hall at Karnak, a forest of 134 sandstone columns, the tallest standing 23 meters high, their surfaces carved with offering scenes and royal titulary. Seti's tomb in the Valley of the Kings stretches over 100 meters into the limestone cliff, its walls covered with astronomical ceilings and passages from the Book of Gates. But it is Seti's son who will eclipse every pharaoh before or after. Ramesses II ascends the throne around 1279 before the Common Era and will occupy it for 67 years. In the 5th year of his reign, he marches north with an army of perhaps 20,000 men and 2,000 chariots to confront the Hittite Empire at the fortified city of Kadesh on the Orontes River in modern Syria. The Hittite king Muwatalli II has assembled a coalition force of comparable size. Ramesses, deceived by false intelligence from Hittite spies, advances ahead of his main divisions and is nearly encircled. Only the timely arrival of reinforcements and the pharaoh's personal counterattack from his chariot prevent catastrophe. The battle ends in tactical stalemate, with both armies withdrawing. Yet on temple walls at Abu Simbel, Karnak, Luxor, and the Ramesseum, Ramesses depicts himself single-handedly routing the enemy. Propaganda carved in stone that will endure longer than any battlefield report. The stalemate ripens into diplomacy. In 1259 before the Common Era, Ramesses and the Hittite King Hattusili III sign a formal peace treaty, the earliest known international accord between two great powers. Its terms include mutual non-aggression, extradition of fugitives, and mutual defense against third-party attack. A copy in Akkadian cuneiform survives on clay tablets from the Hittite capital Hattusa. An Egyptian hieroglyphic version adorns the walls of Karnak. A replica hangs in the United Nations headquarters in New York. The treaty is sealed 13 years later by a royal marriage. A Hittite princess enters Ramesses' household. With peace secured, Ramesses builds without restraint. At Abu Simbel in Lower Nubia, 4 colossal seated figures of the pharaoh, each 20 meters tall, guard a temple carved deep into the sandstone cliff. Twice a year, on dates aligned with the solar calendar, sunlight penetrates the inner sanctuary to illuminate the statues of the gods within. In the eastern delta he constructs a new capital, Ramesses, the House of Ramesses, a sprawling city of palaces, barracks, stables, and faience workshops glazed in turquoise and cobalt. The Ramesseum on the west bank of Thebes serves as his mortuary temple, its courtyards dominated by a seated colossus that once weighed over 1,000 tons before it toppled. Ramesses fathers perhaps 90 children. He outlives many of them. When he finally dies around 1213 before the Common Era. In his early 90s, he has reigned longer than most Egyptians live. His mummy, red-haired and hawk-nosed, survives to this day. The empire he sustained stretches from the Fourth Cataract to the Euphrates, held together not by conquest alone, but by the first great peace. But the empire does not run on pharaohs alone. Beneath the colossal statues and the gold-leafed sarcophagi, beneath the treaties and the temple pylons, there exists another Egypt, one measured not in conquests, but in bread loaves, beer jars, and the slow rhythm of the river. Each year, around late June, the Nile begins to rise. The season of Akhet, inundation, swallows the floodplain under a sheet of reddish-brown water, carrying silt from the Ethiopian highlands. Farmers retreat to higher ground. They mend tools, weave baskets, and wait. When the waters recede in October, the season of Peret begins. The black earth, renewed and rich, receives emmer wheat and barley seed scattered by hand and pressed into the mud by goats driven across the fields. Shaduf beams creak along canal banks, lifting water in leather buckets to irrigate plots beyond the flood's reach. By March, the season of Shemu arrives, harvest. Sickles of flint or bronze cut the golden stalks. Women gather the sheaves. Grain flows into state granaries, measured by scribes who record every bushel on papyrus rolls. Because in Egypt, agriculture is not merely sustenance. It is taxation, temple revenue, and the foundation of the state itself. The diet is simple and remarkably consistent across classes. Bread and beer form the twin pillars. Bakeries produce dozens of loaf varieties, some sweetened with dates or honey, others shaped into cones or rings. Beer, brewed from partially baked barley bread crumbled into water and left to ferment, is consumed daily by laborers, priests, and nobles alike. Onions, garlic, lentils, and dried fish supplement the staple. Wealthier households add roasted fowl, beef, pomegranates, and wine from delta vineyards. Linen, woven from flax harvested along the riverbanks, clothes every Egyptian from peasant to pharaoh. The difference lies only in the fineness of the thread. Nowhere does daily life survive in sharper detail than at Deir el-Medina, the small walled village tucked into a desert valley on the west bank of Thebes. Here live the artisans and craftsmen who cut and paint the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, a community of roughly 60 families at its peak. Their stone houses, arranged along a single central street, contain front rooms for household shrines, middle rooms for sleeping, and rear kitchens with bread ovens. Thousands of ostraca, limestone flakes, and pottery shards used as cheap writing surfaces preserve an astonishing archive. Work rosters list 8-day shifts followed by 2 days of rest. Wage records show payment in grain, fish, vegetables, and occasionally oil or salt. Legal disputes over stolen tools, inheritance claims, and accusations of adultery fill the village court records. Love poems, scratched in cursive hieratic script, speak of longing with startling tenderness. Women at Deir el-Medina and across New Kingdom Egypt hold legal rights that would not reappear in many societies for millennia. They own property, conduct business, serve as witnesses in court, and initiate divorce proceedings, retaining their dowry and a share of jointly acquired assets. Marriage itself is a private contractual arrangement, not a religious ceremony. The education of scribes, the administrative backbone of the state, begins in boyhood. Students copy literary classics onto practice boards, memorizing texts like the Satire of the Trades, which mocks every profession except the scribe's own. Literacy remains rare, perhaps 5% of the population, but its power is immense. The scribe commands the granary, the army roster, the temple inventory. Medicine, too, reaches remarkable sophistication. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, likely copied from an older text, describes 48 surgical cases with clinical precision, examining wounds, diagnosing prognoses as favorable, uncertain, or untreatable, and prescribing treatments involving sutures, splints, and raw meat poultices. The Ebers Papyrus catalogues hundreds of remedies drawn from plants, minerals, and animal products. And when life ends, the 70-day mummification process begins. Embalmers remove the internal organs, storing them in 4 canopic jars. The body is packed in natron salt for 40 days to desiccate. Then it is anointed with oils, wrapped in hundreds of meters of linen strips interlaid with protective amulets, and placed within nested coffins painted with spells from the Book of the Dead. The goal is not mere preservation. It is resurrection. The body made eternal so the Ka and Ba, the spirit components, may return to it forever. In year 29 of Ramesses III, around 1158 before the Common Era, the workers of Deir el-Medina do something unprecedented. Their grain rations have not arrived. They down tools and march to the mortuary temples, refusing to work until they are paid. It is the first recorded labor strike in history. The rations eventually come. The tombs resume. But something has shifted beneath the surface of the state. Something has shifted beneath the surface of the state. The crack that opened at Deir el-Medina in the reign of Ramesses III is not an isolated tremor. It is a symptom of a structure hollowing from within, even as the most terrifying storm in Mediterranean history bears down from without. The crisis begins a generation earlier. Ramesses II dies around 1213 before the Common Era, after 67 years on the throne. His 13th son Merneptah, already elderly, inherits a kingdom whose borders are under pressure. In the 5th year of his reign, around 1208, a vast coalition of Libyans and sea-borne raiders strikes the western delta. Merneptah crushes them, claiming over 6,000 enemy dead. On a granite stele erected at Thebes to commemorate the victory, a single line records a name that will echo through millennia. Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more. It is the earliest known reference to that people in any ancient text. But the steles boast masks a deeper truth. The threat has been repelled, not eliminated. After Meneptar's death, the 19th dynasty collapses into succession disputes. A Syrian chancellor named Bey briefly manipulates the throne. Rival claimants rise and fall within years. Order returns only when Setnakht, a military strongman of uncertain lineage, seizes power around 1190 before the Common Era and founds the 20th dynasty. His son Ramesses III inherits a kingdom bracing for catastrophe. The catastrophe has a name that modern scholars have given it: the Sea Peoples. Across the eastern Mediterranean, around 1180 before the Common Era, a wave of migrating warrior groups sweeps southward. The Hittite Empire, Egypt's old rival, has already been destroyed. Ugarit, the great trading city on the Syrian coast, lies in ashes. Its last letter, found baked in the fire that consumed the city, pleads for help that never came. Cyprus falls. Coastal cities from Anatolia to the Levant are sacked or abandoned. The entire Bronze Age international order, the web of trade, diplomacy, and mutual recognition that connected Egypt, Hatti, Babylon, Assyria, and Mycenae, disintegrates within a single generation. Ramesses III meets them. The reliefs at Medinet Habu, his mortuary temple on the west bank of Thebes, depict the confrontation in extraordinary detail. On land, Egyptian infantry and chariots engage columns of warriors wearing distinctive feathered or horned helmets: the Peliset, the Tierka, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, the Weshesh. Their families travel with them in ox-drawn carts, suggesting not a raid but a migration. At sea, Egyptian vessels ram and board enemy ships in the mouths of the Nile Delta. Archers on shore pour arrows into the melee. The Sea Peoples are defeated, scattered, resettled. The Peliset are settled along the southern Levantine coast, where they become the Philistines of later biblical tradition. But the victory saves Egypt's existence while draining its treasury. The empire's Asiatic provinces are gone. Nubian gold flows diminish. The temple of Amun at Karnak, enriched by centuries of royal donations, now controls more land and labor than the crown itself. The high priests of Amun become a parallel government in Upper Egypt. Around 1155, before the Common Era, Ramesses III is assassinated in a harem conspiracy. His throat cut, as modern computed tomography scans of his mummy revealed in 2012 of the Common Era. His successors, Ramesses IV through Ramesses XI, preside over accelerating decline. The tomb robbery papyri, dating to the reign of Ramesses IX, record judicial proceedings against gangs who systematically looted the royal tombs in the Theban necropolis, melting down gold coffins and stripping mummies of their amulets. Officials are complicit. The state can no longer protect its own dead. By the reign of Ramesses XI, the last of the New Kingdom pharaohs, Egypt is divided in all but name. In the south, the high priest Herihor assumes royal titles and governs from Thebes. In the north, Smendes controls the delta from Tanis. When Ramesses XI dies around 1069 before the Common Era, no single successor reunites the two lands. 3,000 years after Nama joined them, the double crown splits apart once more. The new kingdom is over. The age of empire has passed. The double crown lies broken, and no hand reaches to mend it. At Tanis, in the northeastern delta, Smendes founds the 21st dynasty, ruling from a city built partly with stones hauled from the abandoned capital of Pi Ramesses. At Thebes, 500 miles to the south, the high priests of Amun govern as virtual kings, their authority rooted not in military conquest, but in divine mandate. The two halves of Egypt maintain a careful fiction of unity. Royal marriages link the families, and official correspondence preserves the language of a single state. But the reality is partition. Egypt has become two countries wearing one name. Tanis itself is a strange echo of former grandeur. Its rulers construct temples using recycled obelisks and statuary dragged from Ramesside monuments, re-inscribing cartouches over older names. When the French archaeologist Pierre Montet excavates the royal necropolis at Tanis between 1939 and 1940, he discovers tombs rivaling Tutankhamun's in splendor: silver coffins, gold funerary masks, jeweled pectorals. Yet the world, consumed by war, barely notices. The wealth buried at Tanis reveals that even a diminished Egypt retains extraordinary resources, though the political will to project power beyond its borders has vanished. Into this fractured landscape step the Libyans. For generations, Libyan Meshwesh and Libu tribesmen have settled in the western delta, serving as soldiers and accumulating local influence. Around 943 before the Common Era, a Libyan chief named Shoshenq seizes the throne, founding the 22nd dynasty. Shoshenq I proves an energetic ruler. He reunifies Egypt under a single administration, installs his sons as high priests at Thebes and Memphis, and around 925 before the Common Era launches a military campaign into Palestine, sacking towns across Judah and Israel. His triumphal relief at Karnak lists more than 150 conquered settlements. The Hebrew Bible remembers him as Shishak, the pharaoh who plundered Solomon's temple. Yet Libyan unity proves fragile. Within 2 generations, rival Libyan dynasts establish competing courts. The 23rd dynasty rules simultaneously from Leontopolis, while local strongmen carve out petty kingdoms across the delta. Egypt splinters into a patchwork of principalities, each claiming legitimacy, none commanding obedience beyond its own district. From far to the south, a power watches. The kingdom of Kush, centered at Napata near the Fourth Cataract, has absorbed centuries of Egyptian cultural influence. Its kings worship Amun, build temples in Egyptian style, and write in Egyptian hieroglyphs. Around 728 before the Common Era, the Kushite king Piye marches north with a disciplined army. His victory stela, discovered at Gebel Barkal, records the campaign in extraordinary detail, city after city submitting, Piye's pious refusal to accept the surrender of rulers whose horses had been mistreated. He conquers Memphis, receives the submission of Delta princes, and returns south laden with tribute. His successors Shabaka and Taharqa consolidate the 25th dynasty, ruling an empire stretching from the confluence of the Blue and White Niles to the Mediterranean. They revive Old Kingdom artistic conventions, build steep-sided pyramids at El Kuru and Nuri, and restore neglected temples across Egypt. But Kush's reach exceeds its grasp. To the northeast, the Assyrian Empire under Esarhaddon invades in 671 before the Common Era, capturing Memphis. Taharqa retreats south. Esarhaddon's successor Ashurbanipal returns in 663, sacking Thebes itself, a catastrophe that echoes through the ancient world. The Kushite dynasty withdraws permanently to Napata. From the wreckage, a native Egyptian dynasty emerges. Psamtik I, a prince of size in the western delta, skillfully exploits Assyria's overextension. With Greek and Carian mercenaries, he reunifies Egypt by around 656 before the Common Era, founding the 26th dynasty. The Saite Renaissance that follows is deliberately archaic. Sculptors study Old Kingdom models, scribes revive ancient texts, and the Serapeum at Saqqara receives massive granite sarcophagi for the sacred Apis bulls. Egypt trades extensively with Greece, and the port of Naucratis becomes the first Greek trading colony on Egyptian soil. For over a century, the Saite pharaohs maintain independence, but the rising power of Persia proves irresistible. In 525 before the Common Era, Cambyses II crosses the Sinai and defeats Psamtik III at Pelusium. Egypt becomes a Persian satrapy. The Pharaonic throne now belongs to a king who rules from Susa. The Pharaonic throne sits in foreign hands, but Egypt does not forget itself. Darius I, the great Persian organizer, rules Egypt as the 27th dynasty from 422 before the Common Era. He governs shrewdly, completing a canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea through the Wadi Tumilat, a waterway whose commemorative stelae, inscribed in hieroglyphs, Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, stand along its banks. Darius codifies Egyptian law, repairs temples, and presents himself in pharaonic regalia on the walls of the Hibis temple at Karga Oasis. At Persepolis, carved reliefs depict Egyptian tribute-bearers carrying gold vessels and fine linen, their figures rendered in the Achaemenid style, yet unmistakably marked by the double crown. But Persian rule is never fully accepted. Revolts erupt under Xerxes and Artaxerxes I, each suppressed with military force. In 404 before the Common Era, Amerteus of Sais, the sole pharaoh of the 28th dynasty, successfully expels the Persians, restoring native rule for the first time in over a century. The 29th dynasty at Mendes and the 30th dynasty under Nectanebo I and Nectanebo II continue this fragile independence, building extensively at Philae and Edfu, fortifying the delta against Persian counterattack. Nectanebo I repels a Persian invasion in 373 before the Common Era with the help of Nile flooding and Greek mercenaries. Yet in 343 before the Common Era, Artaxerxes III overwhelms Nectanebo II, who flees south into Nubia. He is the last native Egyptian to rule as pharaoh. The Second Persian occupation lasts barely a decade. In 332 before the Common Era, Alexander of Macedon crosses into Egypt after his siege of Gaza. The Persians offer no resistance. At Memphis, the young conqueror sacrifices to the Apis bull, a gesture the Persian Cambyses had reportedly refused, and the Egyptian priesthood welcomes him. Alexander journeys westward across the desert to the oracle of Amun at Siwa, where the priests greet him as son of the god. On the Mediterranean coast, he traces the outlines of a new city. Alexandria rises on a narrow limestone ridge between the sea and Lake Mareotis, its grid of streets oriented to catch the prevailing winds. Alexander departs and never returns. He dies in Babylon in 323 before the Common Era. In the wars of succession that follow, his general Ptolemy, son of Lagos, seizes Egypt and Alexander's body, installing the embalmed corpse in a golden sarcophagus at the heart of Alexandria. The Ptolemaic dynasty that follows rules for nearly 3 centuries, governing through a dual system, Greek for the administrative elite, Egyptian for the temples and the countryside. The Ptolemies build the great Pharos lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and established the Library of Alexandria, which gathers hundreds of thousands of scrolls from across the Mediterranean. At Edfu, Dendera, Philae, and Kom Ombo, they construct magnificent temples in purely traditional Egyptian style, their pylons carved with scenes of Ptolemaic kings smiting enemies before Horus and Hathor. The Rosetta Stone, carved in 196 before the Common Era under Ptolemy V, bears a priestly decree in hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek, a trilingual monument to the hybrid world the Ptolemies have created. Yet beneath the surface, tensions between Greek settlers and native Egyptians simmer. Upper Egyptian revolts flare repeatedly through the 2nd century before the Common Era. By the 1st century before the Common Era, Rome's shadow falls across the eastern Mediterranean. Cleopatra VII, the last of the Ptolemaic line, ascends the throne in 51 before the Common Era. Brilliant, multilingual, and politically ruthless, she allies first with Julius Caesar, then with Mark Antony, attempting to preserve Egyptian sovereignty through Roman power. The gamble fails. At the Battle of Actium in 31 before the Common Era, Octavian's fleet shatters the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra. The following summer, as Roman legions enter Alexandria, Cleopatra takes her own life. The date is August of 30 before the Common Era. Egypt becomes a Roman province. The Pharaonic tradition, 3,000 years of continuous civilization, passes into history. Though its temples still stand, its gods still receive offerings, and its monuments will outlast the empire that has just consumed it. The temples do not close overnight. For more than 5 centuries after Cleopatra's death, the old religion persists in the deep south. At Philae, on its island above the First Cataract, priests still perform daily rituals for Isis, still inscribe hieroglyphs on granite walls, still welcome pilgrims from Nubia and beyond. The last known hieroglyphic inscription is carved here in 394 of the Common Era. The last Demotic graffito follows in 452. When the Emperor Justinian finally orders the temple closed in 537, the scribal tradition that began with Tum Uj at Abydos, more than 3,700 years earlier, falls silent at last. Yet the language survives. Coptic, the final evolution of the Egyptian tongue, written in Greek letters supplemented by Demotic characters, becomes the liturgical language of Egyptian Christianity. In the deserts east and west of the Nile, the first Christian monasteries in history take root. St. Anthony retreats into the eastern desert around 270 of the Common Era. St. Pachomius establishes communal monastic life at Tabanisi around 320. These desert fathers create a spiritual tradition that will shape Benedictine monasticism and, through it, the entire course of Western religious life. Meanwhile, Roman Egypt feeds the Mediterranean. Grain ships sail from Alexandria to Ostia, carrying the harvest of the Black Land to Roman tables. The Fayum yields extraordinary painted mummy portraits, wax pigment faces of astonishing realism gazing from linen wrappings, Greek technique fused with Pharaonic funerary tradition. The Arab conquest of 641 under Amr ibn al-As transforms Egypt's language, faith, and political orientation. Arabic replaces Coptic in daily speech. Islam becomes the dominant religion. Cairo, founded in 969 by the Fatimids, rises as one of the great cities of the medieval world. Yet the deep structures endure: centralized irrigation, bureaucratic governance, the Nile's eternal rhythm of flood and harvest. The Pharaonic past sleeps beneath the sand until the modern world comes looking. In 1798, Napoleon's expedition brings 167 scholars who produce the monumental Description de l'Égypte. Among the campaign's discoveries is a black granodiorite slab found near Rosetta bearing a decree in hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Greek. In 1822, Jean-François Champollion cracks the code, and 3,000 years of silence end. Auguste Mariette founds the Egyptian Antiquities Service in 1858. Flinders Petrie pioneers systematic excavation methods in the 1880s. Then, on the 26th of November, 1922, Howard Carter peers through a small hole into the sealed burial chamber of Tutankhamun and sees, by candlelight, gold everywhere. The most spectacular archaeological discovery ever made. The 20th century brings both threat and salvation. The Aswan High Dam, completed in 1970, promises to end the ancient cycle of flood and famine, but threatens to drown the temples of Nubia beneath Lake Nasser. Between 1964 and 1968, a massive international campaign organized by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization relocates Abu Simbel, cutting Ramesses II's colossal facade into over 1,000 blocks and reassembling it 65 meters higher on an artificial cliff. It remains the largest archaeological rescue in history. Today, the Grand Egyptian Museum rises on the Giza Plateau within sight of the pyramids, housing more than 100,000 artifacts. New discoveries continue. Sealed tombs, gilded coffins, lost workshops, emerging from the sand with startling regularity. Modern Egyptians navigate a complex relationship with their pharaonic inheritance, a past that belongs simultaneously to them and to the world. The Nile still flows north. The limestone of the Great Pyramid still catches the first light of dawn. The carved names of kings dead for 4,000 years remain legible on temple walls. No other civilization has spoken so clearly across so vast a distance of time. Thank you for joining this journey along the Nile through 3,000 years of history. If these stories have stirred your curiosity, consider subscribing so you never miss the next exploration into the civilizations that shaped our world.